Well, hey everybody. I am so excited to have you on, Kristi. We were just talking before we went on the air that I've had a number of people in the NIL space want to come on to Inside College Soccer and talk about NILs. And I just didn't feel after listening to their background that they really would be able to give. There's so much bad information. How about that? I wanted to make sure that when we did an episode on NILs, that it was the most up to date and accurate information. And we ran into each other, I guess, on Twitter or Facebook, one of the two. I don't
Facebook
remember.
first, maybe. Hmm.
Yeah. So, and everybody that's not joined our Facebook groups, resources for parents and players, do it. Kristi will post in there. I think that's she asked me if she could post something in there, and I said, "Oh yes, please." I mean, I'm more interested maybe than some of the parents and players are. But then I've been following you on X, and you post some really good stuff on X. So thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. There's some
Uh,
really good people in this space, but there's also some bad actors and a lot of self-interest in this space. People who want to sell you something or provide you some sort of services. I keep telling people, I have nothing to sell you. I have no services. All I have is a book, and you don't have to buy that. I'll give you a lot of good advice right here for free.
Right. So for everybody, this is the book. And Kristi, thank you to your publishers for sending me an advanced copy so that I could read it. And I'm almost done. I'm under the last chapter today. And it's really what I noted about the book. It's not like a novel. It's not a book that you like read from the first page to the last page, or you won't grasp what you want. But you can just turn into it to the chapter you want and use it like a resource book. I used to do taxes many years ago, and like this was how I would look up the subject of something that I wanted, and then I could just go to that page and read about that. So obviously, give us your background. You are an attorney, or former
I
attorney,
am.
or are an attorney not practicing, or
Yes. I
right?
say I'm a recovering attorney. My mother hates when I say I was an attorney because she's like, "You still are." I am still licensed as an attorney, but I have not practiced in a really long time. I left practicing law in 2011 because I got hired by ESPN to be their sports business reporter. It was not a path I knew even really existed. I had always wanted to be a lawyer and loved actually the area of law I practiced, which had nothing to do with sports. But I blogged on the side about legal issues in sports and business issues in sports, and it just became a bigger and bigger part of my life until ESPN hired me away. And I have never gone back to practicing law, although I use it a lot in my everyday work as a reporter and as a professor and a consultant. So thankful I have the law degree, not interested in having clients. That's why I say I have no services to offer your audience. I don't want to be your lawyer, but I'll give you the best advice I can to navigate this space.
Right. And so currently, you are also teaching NIL classes at University of Florida, correct?
I am. It started with one class actually in the public relations department, which seems like an odd place to teach it. You would think it would be in sport management. So then sport management found out I was there and they moved me over to sport management as well. So I teach undergrad, grad, and graduate in sport management. And I'm adding a class at the law school this fall that I'm really excited about.
And you were in PR for a while, right?
I was NIL is kind of perfect for me because it merges all these parts of my life that seemed really divergent. I was an attorney. I was mostly a corporate attorney. I did a lot of drafting of contracts, review of contracts. Then
Sounds
I went into
exciting.
being a yeah. But what I realize now is that I love writing and that's what I was getting to do and that's why I enjoyed it. I wasn't cognizant of that at the time, but I can look back and see now that's why I enjoyed it. And then I was at ESPN for a few years. I left there. I actually got recruited by a PR agency to come and ghostwrite for their attorney clients. And I did that for a little while and then ended up sort of branching out into some other entrepreneurs as well. And all the while, I was still part time writing as a sports business reporter. And then when I knew NIL was coming, in 2019, California passed the first state law about NIL. And as we got into 2020 and into the pandemic, and I was sitting at home and not traveling as much as usual and had all this time on my hands, I hired an SEO coach and I said, I have this site, businessofcollegesports.com. I built it back when I was a lawyer. I write on it sometimes. I want this site to be like the place where you come and learn what's happening in NIL. And I worked with this SEO coach to sort of do the back end stuff to help me hit the ground running. And so I was writing about NIL from really late 2020, long before the NCAA rules actually went to effect in July of 21. And I thought I would write about it for 6 to 9 months after NIL started. And then like things would even out and we would all know what it looks like and we'd move on with our lives. And I would go back to writing about other business and legal issues in sports. And it's 4 years later now, and it's still the only thing I write and speak about because it still changes every single week. And now we've got revenue sharing coming as well. And so, that I split kind of my focus between NIL and revenue sharing because it's all kind of baked in together. And I don't know that it'll ever slow down at this point. I think it has just become my life.
Yeah, it's so hard for me. So I've coached in college for 22 years, and I've been in the business now for over 30 years, and I'm in the old school part, and I was doing soccer, so I was coaching soccer. So it was like we didn't get paid any money as coaches per se. We were very underpaid. Most of us had multiple jobs to pay the bills at home. We weren't worried about our athletes not getting paid because we weren't getting paid. Nobody was getting paid, so we didn't think of it as a big deal. And even the schools I coached at, Cal State East Bay, the state school, we didn't. Our basketball players weren't getting paid any. Our coaches weren't getting paid $250,000 a year or anything. Nobody was getting overpaid, right? I wasn't at Stanford or anything like that, right? Or Florida. You look at the women's coach at University of Florida, she gets a good chunk of change, but it's still not the millions of dollars that the football coaches are getting or that the basketball coaches are getting. So it's really not influxed into the soccer world. And what I was most intrigued about in your book is you've got some stories of you know, Division 3. I think you've got a Division 3 volleyball girl in there that you talk about that didn't
Lainey
have much of
Higgins.
a
Yep.
following at all that's taken advantage of NIL.
Mhm.
So how does I mean I think we can all kind of picture, not that we don't want to talk about it, but we can all kind of picture how the number one quarterback recruit in the country being recruited by Notre Dame or Texas or Stanford is going to get money. I think we all can kind of understand that, the amount of money in March Madness. I looked it up the other day, like 900 million, something like that they bring in just
Yeah.
March Madness. And then football during the regular season, Division 1 football during the regular season is king. But the amount of money is insane, and the amount of money these coaches make is insane. But what about the other, what we call non-revenue sports, right? The Olympic sports. How does NIL work for those athletes?
Yeah, I really made a point when I was writing the book to write about athletes you've probably never heard of. And that was on purpose. I had Hannah and Haley Cavender wrote the forward for me. I'm so grateful. They're athletes most people recognize, but the rest of the book is largely going to be athletes you've never heard of before. And that was intentional because I wanted people to understand that I believe NIL is available for anyone who wants to participate in it. And it can look really different from one athlete to the next. I had athletes in all three divisions in a number of different sports doing a lot of different things. I mean, I think we talked about over 20 different ways athletes were making money using their NIL opportunities. You mentioned the D3 athlete. Her name's Lainey Higgins. She's actually at my alma mater, Oglethorpe University in Atlanta. And that was kind of fun for me. Actually, the first time Lainey reached out to me, she was a high school senior and she had done what was believed to be and I think was the first NIL deal for a female high school student athlete in the state of Florida, because at the time, Florida didn't allow high school NIL. You could do it once your eligibility was complete. So towards the end of her senior year, she pitched herself to an equipment company in her space and was able to get her first NIL deal. And then she pitched herself to me as a journalist to write about it. And as we got to talking, she said she was going to Oglethorpe in the fall. And I was like, wait a second. I went to Oglethorpe, which is a tiny school in Atlanta that hardly anyone's ever heard of unless you're being recruited by them. And she is proof that you don't have to have a huge following. You don't have to be at a big brand name school. She was actually the first college athlete to get a deal with Lululemon, which is something that athletes with tens and hundreds of thousands of followers at the D1 level coveted and
Right.
wanted. I knew some of them who pitched for it. Who got it? Lainey, a D3 athlete, because she had an established Instagram live show she was doing where she was interviewing other student athletes as they walked around on campus. It's called Walking and Talking. And she pitched them to be the title sponsor of this series. And they said yes. And I think now she's been through a second season and maybe is even into her third season, and they have renewed with her. So she's a great example of an athlete who is sort of punching above her weight and is doing a fantastic job with NIL.
Yeah, that was amazing. The other thing that really blew me away is you talking about kids, and God, this scares me. I even want to bring this up. There's already enough pressure on, I get parents of 10-year-olds reaching out to me asking, when can you help me get my kid to college? It's like, your kid's 10. I think they should be out playing with their friends and running around and enjoying life. And I know I changed my mind from the time I was 10, 11, 12, you know, and till I was 35. I didn't know what I want to do with my life. And it would have been horrible had somebody pushed me and pushed me and pushed me and pressured me and pushed me. And I see parents running their kids' Twitter accounts, Instagram accounts, TikTok accounts. And it's like, oh no, it's my kid. They want to do it. BS. Bullshit. It's not your kid. It's not your kid. It's you. But you do tell a story about a 12-year-old young lady that truly is, with her parents' guidance and help, truly running her own account. Just got a different engine. Tell us how that works with
Her name's her name's Reese Leckner, and if you met her, you would know this is all her. Reese
right.
is just one of those kids who's entrepreneurial, the kind of kid who goes and like sets up their own lemonade stand. And you hear these stories every once in a while about kids who just are so ambitious and do these really cool entrepreneurial things as kids. That's Reese. She wanted to be the first sort of kid athlete in her state. She was hoping to be the youngest in the country. She got beat out by an 8-year-old golfer, but she wanted to be the youngest to have an NIL deal. And she went and pitched herself to one of the gyms where she trained and worked out. She had to educate them about what NIL was, how they were allowed to work with her, and sort of what she had in mind. And I just saw last week, this is not in the book because it just happened, but she was putting up pictures. She got her first deal with a deodorant brand, and she was on vacation with her family in Colorado. And she's got these pictures of this, deodorant sitting on these red rocks in Colorado, and she's creating content while she's out there for this brand deal. Her mom is a former D1 athlete who's really savvy about the NIL space, but I have spoken to both of them at length for several, it's been 2 or 3 years now since I first met them. This is driven by Reese and
Wow.
her desire to do this, not at all by her mother. But I met the parents that you're talking about. Some of them are in my Facebook group. I love them. I'm happy to help them. But you can tell like they're the ones who want to do it. They're the ones running the accounts. They're the ones shooting all the pictures. The kid's never even in it. I don't think that I don't think for me, I don't have kids, so I'm not going to tell you how to raise yours. But I think you should let the kid come to you and be interested in this kind of stuff and want to pursue it. And we do see athletes who, by the time they're graduating high school, already have sort of a roster of brand deals they're going into college with. That's not available in every state yet. There are still quite a few states. Well, I think we're down to like 15, 18 states, something like that, that don't allow it at the high school level. But the vast majority have now gotten on board with it.
Yeah, and that's wild to me. I mean, there was, I remember reading, there's a book about the Indiana men's basketball team back when Bobby Knight was coaching, called Season on the Brink. And I remember reading a story, there's a story in there about the guys on the basketball team had a charity. And so they did a calendar for that charity, and they each were, a person, taking pictures, and did a photo shoot and sold these for charity. And they were fined by the NCAA. I mean, nobody was making money. So we've gone from that to, and to players being able to make money, not just before, but not just during college, but before college. So how does that work? So I mean, in the soccer space, we have players overseas professionally, right? Playing at professional clubs. They might be with the youth club at Manchester United or at Bayer
Right.
Leverkusen or at some big pro club, and they can get paid for expenses like driving, gas to go and food to go,
Mhm.
normally, 750, $1,000 a month, something like that. And the
Yeah.
NCAA will say, no problem, no problem with that. But they can't really get paid to play. This almost sounds now like youth athletes are getting paid to play. How does that differ from an NIL deal? Pay to play versus, pay to play your sport versus an NIL deal. How does the NCAA differentiate that?
The lines have really blurred. I mean, there's supposed to be quid pro quo if it's an NIL deal, and the quid pro quo is not supposed to be based on performance. So it's supposed to be an Instagram post or a public appearance, signing autographs, selling your own merchandise, teaching a lesson or a camp. You're supposed to be doing something with your name, image, and likeness in order to receive payment. And I would say more, we see a lot of NIL that's brand deals, or like I was saying, selling your own merch, leading a camp or clinic, doing one-on-one lessons. I played softball my entire life to college, and then I didn't play in college, and I taught pitching lessons to high school athletes while I was in college. I made really good money teaching pitching lessons, and this was 25 years ago. Parents pay even more for that kind of stuff now. So that sort of thing, those are true NIL deals. It is not supposed to be, we'll give you $5,000 to come play for X team this year. So there are still rules in place that prohibit pay to play. Where those lines have really blurred is when it comes to NIL collectives, which largely exist at the college level, although I've had a couple of high school level collectives over the last few years that have reached out to me for consulting work in states that allow it. Some states, like I'm in Florida, I think our state law expressly prohibits collectives at the high school level, but the college level. And they were essentially formed by boosters and donors who wanted to pool money together to be able to do NIL deals with athletes. The athletes are supposed to be doing things in return for that, like signing autographs, showing up for public appearances, putting posts on Instagram, whatever it is. We all know that when you get, like, Michigan signed a contract, not to pick on them, everybody's doing it, but Michigan just had one of the largest deals we've ever seen, over $10 million for their incoming quarterback. It's not $10 million to post on his Instagram and sign autographs. Now that's what the contract says, but I think we all know that that's not what it is. And so the lines have really blurred and will continue to blur as we move into this revenue sharing era. But I would say outside of football, men's basketball, to a lesser degree, women's basketball, and then like an athlete here or there, like there's a softball player at Texas Tech that just got her second seven-figure deal from Texas Tech's collective. We don't see it trickling down beyond football and men's basketball much. Like I said, a little bit in women's basketball, and then you're going to see a smattering in some other sports. But largely, the NIL deals that are happening, the ones I'm talking about in the book, those are true NIL deals.
Yeah, I mean, look, anybody who's followed sports for long enough has heard the stories of the guy who was the player who was paid, $30,000 a year as a hired to water the football field, except it was automatic sprinklers,
Right.
right? So he just had to show up and made sure the sprinklers went on. And then they're paying him, and they're going, "Well, he's paid to do a job. We're not paying him to play football." But clearly, they're paying him to play football. This sounds like NIL just sounds like another workaround between just flat out playing players. I don't know why the NCAA. At some point, isn't the NCAA just going to say stop? Wouldn't it be easier just to stop with the facade?
No, because or they want to cling to the amateurism language. I was on a panel with another attorney a few weeks ago, Darren Heitner, and he has long advocated that the athletes should be employees and able to collectively bargain. And he said, "Here's what I don't get: like, universities should want this at this point. This is the only way they're going to be able to regulate what's happening. It's the only way they're going to be able to put an effective cap on these deals. It's the only way they're going to be able to put, guardrails in place that try to restore competitive balance, and they're still resisting it." And I was talking to an agent last week. I was at a conference with athletic directors and senior athletic officials, and I met this agent, and we were talking in the hallway, and he said, athletes shouldn't let people lead them astray into thinking that they would be better off as employees who could collectively bargain. They should fight back against that because they have it better right now, because right now it's pretty unregulated, and they can, the sky's the limit. If we
Right.
move to employment and collective bargaining, it actually, and they're both right. It would be better for the universities, and actually might see the sort of shrinking dollar amounts for the athletes if we move to that model. I have never been a proponent of that. I, however, now believe we are going to get there, at least for football and men's basketball, if not for everybody else.
Yeah, that's the old be careful what you wish for. Look, if I hire you, I can also just fire you. Then,
Mhm.
right now the kids have there is some protection, especially in transfers now. That
Yeah.
college now owns your contract per se for the next, well, up to 5 years. If they give you scholarship money and you're a transfer, they can't get out of that money no matter what.
Right.
So there's at least some protection there for the athletes, and they can't just be up and fired per se. Yeah, if you're an employee, oh man, now I don't know that I like that either. I don't know
Yeah.
that I like this, but I don't know like that. I do think this is good. I think this is good for the athletes. I do. I think the athletes do deserve the opportunity to try to create something for themselves as they play. I've always hated it that they couldn't earn any money. Let's talk a little bit about collectives. I mean, when is the first collective going to sue a player because they transfer? Like
We're almost
that's the one
there.
I'm waiting for.
Well,
We've got
we're
to be
really
really
close.
close. You put out
We
millions of dollars for
Yeah.
this athlete. It's all alumni, and they put in all this money and businesses in the community. They want that athlete there for 4 years, and then the athlete's stock rises, they jump ship, and that collective is left holding the bag, so to speak. How does that work? Are athletes having to pay back money? Are
Not
they going to get
yet.
sued? How's that
The
work?
keywords yet. I think the closest we've gotten to the suit is sort of still ongoing right now, which is that when Nico Iamaleava decided to try to renegotiate with Tennessee for more money, and they chose not to come up to the amount he was asking for, he ended up deciding to transfer to UCLA. Well, he has a brother who had committed to Arkansas. And I always feel so bad. I can never remember the brother's name, but he had committed to Arkansas. He had signed a contract with the collective, but he had not been paid any money yet, nor had he like arrived on campus and been playing yet. And he decided to transfer to UCLA with his brother. And the collective at Arkansas has been very public about the fact that they are going to seek to enforce a clause in their contract that was for what's called liquidated damages. So they're essentially saying that they have been harmed by him making this choice not to show up at Arkansas. Now they haven't even paid him anything yet, and they are going to want him to pay them because they, say they relied on him coming there and expected it, and now he's changed his mind. So last I heard, a lawsuit had not been actually filed in that, but they've been kind of public and vocal about it. We'll see what ends up happening there. But as we're moving into revenue sharing now for this coming school year, I have been reviewing some revenue sharing contracts, not to give legal advice, but I've just been looking at some of them to get a feel for what schools are asking for. And we are seeing buyout clauses that are very similar to what we see in coaching contracts. But the lawyers I've talked to who practice in this space and expect to be part of these coming lawsuits say they're not sure that those buyout clauses are really enforceable. It's not the same as a coach's contract because they aren't employees, and they think they've got some good arguments that would potentially get out of that. But as of right now, the buyouts are in the contracts, and in the revenue sharing Q&A we got from the NCAA last week, there's actually a Q&A in there that talks about if a school pays a buyout to another school, school A pays a buyout to school B because of a player who's transferring, that buyout money is actually going to count against their revenue sharing cap. And they think that that will slow down transfers maybe a little bit if schools are having to count that buyout money against their revenue sharing cap. That remains to be seen. We'll see how that goes this first year.
Yeah, wild. I mean, I don't know how they're going to win that lawsuit. I mean, a contract's not even valid if there's no money exchanged, right?
Well, in that case, I think that rule is contemplating, excuse me, Q&A is contemplating you have been there for a season. You were maybe on a multi-year contract and you've
Right.
decided after year one
That's
to
the one I'm
leave.
thinking about.
Right.
Right.
And they want the other school to buy out the rest of your contract. They all look a little bit different. And that's the thing. And I ended up writing the final chapter of the Athletes NIL Playbook is about revenue sharing contracts. And it was based on the ones I had seen so far because this book went to print in April. So the house settlement hadn't even been approved yet. And I had to just sort of like guess at what I thought was going to happen. And I'm really lucky that what I thought was going to happen did. And so the book is accurate. But I had several attorneys who've been negotiating revenue sharing contracts because schools were already sending them out with this football recruiting class that's coming in this fall. And so I had attorneys give me clauses that were problematic in the contracts. I had reviewed some. I made a list of things to look out for because they are wildly different. Like I looked at one the other day that was a 2-page contract, and most of the second page was just signatures. I had another one that was 16 pages that I was looking at next to it. Like, so your son or daughter could get these wildly different off. It might sound like the same money. Like, say both schools have offered you $50,000 in revenue sharing to come there. If one of them's got a 2-page contract and one of them has a 16-page contract, there's some things in the 16-pager you probably need to pay attention to. There might be hiding in the 2-page too, but that's how different it is. And now we're expecting 17 and 18-year-olds and their parents to understand this stuff, look for it, negotiate it. I can't say this enough. I know I am an attorney. And so you're all thinking, of course, you're going to tell us to go to an attorney. You can't come to me. I'm not going to make any money off of you, but I am telling you, you have got to get attorneys to look at these revenue sharing contracts because there are all sorts of things hiding in there that you're not going to want in your kid's contract.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, I had women's soccer not power four, but close to won multiple national championships. Say that the kids at that level, the girls on that level, many of them are coming in. Two questions: how much playing time will you guarantee me? And how much money will you give me?
Yep. I
And
think
it's like,
that's what
oh,
coaches in every sport are experiencing. I'm going to cheat and look at my phone because I saved this article earlier today, but I saw my
please.
first soccer revenue sharing today. I've been saving as schools have announced which athletes they're going to pay. And I
So
saw the very first one was soccer
as you
today.
look for that, tell us what NIL versus revenue sharing. What are we talking about?
Okay,
What's it mean?
so NIL started first. That started in 2021, and it is you have to be actively doing something. I talked about this earlier. There has to be quid pro quo. There is some use of your name, image, and likeness. Your name's on a camp. You're signing autographs. You're posting on your Instagram for a brand. It is not performance based at all. Revenue sharing, and it comes from third parties. Universities up until July 1st of 2025, universities have not been allowed to pay athletes directly, not even to use their name, image, and likeness. None of the payments can come from universities. It was brands, collectives, individuals. Now,
Okay.
starting July 1st, 2025, universities can pay athletes directly. This first year, they're allowed to pay up to $20.5 million to their athletes per school, but they get to decide how they do it. And so the Power Four, I think, pretty much have all committed. They're doing the full 20.5. But when you get outside of the Power Four, it really varies. You know, a school might only be doing 2 million and maybe they're only doing it with one or two sports. You know, even the Power Four, most of them are only doing it with a handful of sports. They're not doing it with all their sports. But every school has the discretion to decide how much of it they're going to do and what are they going to require of the athlete, because it's still not supposed to be based on playing on the field. Pay for play still isn't allowed by the NIL. This revenue sharing is still supposed to be based on you know, the NIL of the student athlete and the university's use of it. So most of these contracts have social media posts, personal appearances, maybe autograph requirements. You know, it varies a lot from one school to the next. But attorneys have been sort of arguing that also in a lot of these, there are clauses that are related to performance, like what happens if you transfer or you aren't playing, and gives universities the discretion to change your pay for a number of reasons. And so attorneys are already sort of arguing like these are pay for play contracts, even though you say they're not. I mean, there's sentences in some of them that says this is not pay for play or this is not pay for performance, but we all know that it is, and that's why most of the money is going to football and men's basketball. Also because they bring in most of the revenue. So a lot of schools are
Right.
saying, look, football brings in 75% of the revenue, so they're going to get 75% of the revenue share. Whole nother subject that we won't get into. Title IX attorneys say that actually doesn't work. But so I would expect we're going to see lawsuits around Title IX, and we're going to see antitrust lawsuits too. Even though a judge approved a settlement with a cap in it, that doesn't actually mean that it complies with antitrust law. And so there are attorneys out there talking about bringing cases about this arbitrary cap and that there shouldn't be a cap on revenue sharing. So the legal battles are far from over. But this first year, what we're going to move forward with is this $20.5 million cap. And I found it. Like, this is it might not be the only soccer one, but it's the only one I've seen and saved. Kentucky announced what it's going to be. I'm sorry, not Kentucky. Kansas announced what it was going to be sharing for revenue sharing, and they are doing football, men's and women's basketball, baseball, softball, volleyball, and soccer. I'm
This
sorry,
is
not
University
Kentucky,
of
Kansas.
Kansas, not Kansas State, but University of Kansas.
Yes.
So what
So
is, okay, so
hopefully
what's that mean for soccer, for the soccer folks out there? What's that mean?
they declined to provide the percentages. They're splitting up. I will say most of the Power Four, it's 75 percent or so to football, 10 to 15% to men's basketball, and then what's left is sort of divided between the other sports. You see, the Power Four are trying to include women's sports. The ones I've seen the most have been women's basketball, softball, volleyball, and gymnastics. Those tend to be the ones so far that have been announced. Some schools are announcing their mathematical formulas, but I would say most are not. That's probably a Title IX thing. They don't necessarily want it out there in the press exactly how they've decided to divide this up. But it does mean that soccer athletes at Kansas can expect to start getting these revenue sharing contracts. It might be one athlete on the team. It might be everybody on the team. You know, I don't think that they've disclosed those details yet.
So we say revenue sharing because we're hearing schools talk about opt in, opt out, right? So where they can opt into revenue sharing and they can opt out of revenue sharing. And it's so hard for me because I look at a school like, I don't know, I'm just going to pick on a school too, like Akron. Akron has been struggling financially for years. They've talked about closing the school down, but their men's soccer team is a former national champion, has been a powerhouse. And it's like, I can't imagine a school like Akron saying, we're going to give away some of more of our revenue, even if we're struggling financially, we're going to give away more of it to our athletes. We can barely run our school. And I know that's, I shouldn't pick on one school, but there's a lot of mid-level, and we say mid-major, like it's, I hate the term mid-major because mid-major means major, but every Division I school that's not a Power Four says they're a mid-major, puts themselves in there, and everybody wants to be called termed that. But the lower end Division I schools that are struggling, possibly some of the HBCUs and some of the schools up north, Chicago States and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They're just state schools, and if the state is struggling, then they're struggling. Here in California, we've been there. We're in big deficits right now, and so that the money's going to, they're talking about $30 million being cut from universities, public universities. How are these schools that are opting in? How is this going to work for them?
They're gonna have to decide, if they choose to opt in, I would say it's probably they've done an analysis of the importance of that sport or several sports or athletics in general to that university and what the student body would look like without it. For example, I did a consulting study years ago when UAB cut their football program. I was part of a team that went in. And as we looked at it, it was going to decimate, removing football was actually going to like decimate the male population at UAB, particularly the non-white male population at UAB by cutting that one sport. Obviously, that's a big sport with a lot of people. But when I was at my D3, I sat on the board of trustees for a little while, and everybody always wanted to discuss like, should we add football? My Division 3 does not have football. We still don't. And the discussion at the D3 level is always, but that gets you more male enrollment because a lot of liberal arts D3 institutions are really female heavy, or they were at the time when we were
Right.
having this discussion. I don't follow it super closely anymore, but that was a way to get more male students at the school was have football so that you at least
Right.
had the football team. And even at mine, we were, I think, female heavy. And a lot of the males who went to Oglethorpe when I was there went because they were athletes. I mean, every male friend I can think of I had at that school was on one of our sports teams, and
Right.
that's why they came to Oglethorpe. So I think that there are discussions that go beyond just the money that it costs. Some of them feel like they have to participate in revenue sharing, like Akron, for example. If they don't participate in revenue sharing, what kind of players are they going to get going forward if other schools
Right.
are paying soccer athletes? They're going to lose out on the talent. Well, what difference will that make in the school if soccer is no longer successful there? And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I'm part of a consulting group that goes in and does those kind of studies sometimes, but there's a lot of factors you look at when it comes to application and enrollment and even just like student satisfaction with the university. Like at UAB, when we went in, the students were lobbying to get football back. They were willing to pay a student fee to get football back because they wanted to go to a school that had big time college football. That was like part of their college experience. So I
Right.
think the analysis looks really different from one school to the next, and some of them are still deciding. They're saying we're going to sit out year 1 and see how it goes, and then we'll decide if we're going to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's what I've seen too. And I tell you what, every school that I've been at where the question has been put to the student body, whether they want to help fund athletics or lose them, I've never seen one fail
I know.
yet,
And
even
look,
if they're not
I
athletes.
went to this tiny D3, didn't play my sport. They didn't have softball. So I gave up playing my sport and then I ended up being a cheerleader because I missed doing something. But when I was applying to law school, I wanted to go to a law school on a big campus with big time college football because I didn't have that experience in college and I would do my college experience all over again. But I knew when I went to law school, it would be kind of cool to go to a school that had it. And I ended up going to Florida for law school. And I just got super lucky that while I was there, they won a football championship and two basketball championships while I was a law student there. And it's probably a huge reason. Well, it not probably, it is a huge reason I became a sports business reporter because I saw what those championships did for Gainesville and for the university. And then I became fascinated by the business side of college sports and I started writing about it and it changed my whole career path. If Florida had been terrible those years and hadn't won championships, I'd probably still be sitting in a law office somewhere.
Wild. So being out here in California, and of course nationally, but we hear I'm born and raised 20 minutes from Oakland, and so we get a lot of information about this House NCAA settlement, right?
Yep.
Lawsuit. So what was the lawsuit basically about? And then what's our takeaway from it?
Yeah, so the lawsuit was filed. Grant House is the named plaintiff on it. He was a swimmer. Sedona Prince and some other athletes were part of the original class, but Grant got his name on the case forever, which apparently hasn't been great for him lately because some swimmers are blaming him for losing their positions on their teams. We can talk a little bit about how roster limits are changing as a part of this, but it ended up being certified as a class action, and the class had to be sort of narrowed. And so it's athletes who played. I believe the opening date is like mid 2016 through current, and it was about the missed NIL opportunities before NIL started in 2021, and then also the NIL opportunities that were lost because athletes aren't part of the video game revenue or the broadcast revenue. So there were these. It's complicated. It would take an entire hour to explain this part of it, but there were sort of these different buckets of money that ended up in the settlement. And so athletes had to go and opt into the settlement and they would get an idea of what their payout was going to be. And I had a swimmer reach out to me who was getting $12. I had a football athlete who had played at two different Power Four institutions who was getting $200,000. So it was an individual analysis of each athlete, how many years they played during the period, what school they were at. So this athlete, this football athlete, he had been at 2 different ones, and he made exponentially more money from one of them than the other one based on the metrics that they used for this formula, because one was sort of a bigger brand name school than the other one was. And so there was this formula that economists used to come up with how much each athlete was going to get in back pay. So there's $2.8 billion in back pay for the use of student athletes NIL in broadcast and video games, and then also their missed NIL opportunities prior to 2021. So that's the back-looking portion, and actually there's already been an appeal filed about that portion of the case. But the piece you hear the most about is the revenue sharing piece, which is the forward-looking piece, and it says that each year schools will be able to share some amount of money with their student athletes. It's based on a formula. This first year is 20.5 million. It will go up 4% the following year, and again the next year, and then it gets reevaluated and recalculated. So we know we're starting at 20.5, and as I said before, each institution has the discretion to decide how they do that and if they even want to be part of it. So schools can opt out and decide not to do revenue sharing at all. It also means if they do that, that they are not subject to the new roster limits, which are a huge topic of discussion alongside revenue sharing. But if you do revenue sharing, then you have to abide by the new roster limits, which now replace scholarship limits for those institutions. They can give full scholarships to everyone on their roster, but for most sports, the new roster size is below the average roster size most sports carried previously. You had all these athletes who weren't on scholarship, who were walk-ons, and there aren't going to be spaces available for many of those going forward. So we are seeing a contraction in the Division I level for those who opt into revenue sharing. Their rosters are going to be shrinking in every sport.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, I didn't pay attention to any of them. I was looking at the list of roster limits in your book, and I noticed lacrosse, and I'm thinking, I don't know much about lacrosse, but I think they have like 11 players like soccer does. It looks very similar. And it turns out it's 10 for the men and it's 12 for the women, but yet the men's lacrosse roster limit is 48 and the women's is 38. So the women have more on the field than the men do, but they get 10 less players than that. And soccer has 11 on the field, but they only have 28. And I'm going, okay, what crazy lawyer sat down and said this is, or judge says this is what makes sense? Where's the logic? And then
No
football
idea where
has
these numbers came from.
105, but they only get 85 scholarships. So they're not even scholarshiping
Well,
all of the 105, right?
Well, now they can have the whole, so now they can have the full 105 on scholarship.
Okay.
So like for football, for example, before you had the 85 scholarship limit, now it's 105 roster limit. But like a lot of the institutions of the Power Four had 150. I think I saw Texas A&M had 180 on their roster last year. Well, now they've got to get down to 105. So even though there's going to be more scholarships, they can go up from 85 to 105. You can't go past 105. There is nothing, there are
Right.
no walk-ons, no non-scholarship, like there's nothing beyond the 105, except that in these early years, we are going to have what's going to be called the designated student athlete potentially. These are athletes who are being cut from rosters because of these roster limit changes. They contested the settlement, and the judge made the lawyers sort of go back to the drawing board. And what they came up with was this idea of the designated student athlete. That tag has to be applied, I think, by the middle of July. And athletes who receive that tag do not count against the roster limit. So if they were going to be cut solely because you had to get your roster limit down, or an incoming recruit got their offer pulled solely because the roster has to go down, then they can get that designated student athlete tag. And not only will they not count against the roster at their current school, it will follow them the rest of their the rest of their athletic eligibility, and they can take that tag to other schools and not count against their rosters either. So there's going to be a weird, whatever, next 4 years or 5 years where some athletes have a tag they're toting around with them and they're not counting against rosters, then that will all drop off and we will just have the firm roster limits. And as a side note on the designated student athlete thing, in case anyone has an athlete affected by this, they don't have to give your athlete the DSA tag. And I've heard coaches refusing to give it because they don't want the athlete to transfer and take it with them. And then for their, competition to have these larger rosters because of the designated student athletes. So it's discretionary by the schools. I have heard already of some schools giving it. So it's happening in some places, but they don't have to. If they say you were cut from the roster for some other reason and that it wasn't solely based on the roster limits, they can still let you go and not give you that tag. So it's
Boy,
it's
now
common.
how's
This is
that
the
going to
stuff where
work?
how are parents
Oh,
expected to know all this?
Well,
I can
no, and
barely keep
how
it
does it
straight
work?
and
I
I
mean,
report on it every day.
you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? So we did, in soccer at least, we had coaches telling athletes, pulling them into the office at the end of the season, say, we are opting in, we are choosing to release you. We have to get down to 28. Okay, so at least verbally, they told them that that's what they're doing. So now the athlete goes away and has to start, and they go into the portal and they start looking and they find a new home. Well, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. They're not going to go back to the school of the coach that said, I don't want you here. That's why I said, keep on telling my friends, it's like, what parent wants their kid to go back to a school that says, you're not wanted here,
Yeah.
right?
And
I'm
what
never going
kid
to
wants to
play
go back to
you.
that team and
You're
be
not
like,
good
I know they
enough.
told yeah, the kids, with their teammates, like, I know, these that guys thought I was leaving, but I'm back.
So that's I don't see that happening almost anywhere. And then so then and it's only the original coach who can call that player back and say now you're a designated student athlete.
Right.
So the new school can't do that. And
No, not unless they were now planning to cut them. I guess they could say, well,
so I
now we
guess they
got
could
you.
start playing games. Coaches could start playing games and say, "You were here in the spring. I was going to release you. Now I'll call you a DSA so that I can have 29 or 30 or 31 or 35 on a roster. I'm just going to say I'm going to cut 10 of you,
Yeah.
but I won't cut 10 of you. I'll just
And
make
I'm
you all
sure
10
there's some
DSAs."
mechanism in place for that. Like I said, I think the date to declare the DSAs is July 15th. And the NCAA just put out a very lengthy, like 40 something page long Q&A last week. And there's a whole section on the designated student athletes. And I can't remember any other restrictions that would have been in place. But like I said, some of the coaches are coming out saying, I'm not going to put the tag on anybody because then they're going to be able to transfer and take it with them.
Right. Yeah, this is wild because I keep on coming back to soccer, Christy, just because that's what I know. But I just got to apply to other sports that had larger rosters. 28 is too small. It's too small. It's too small for Division One, and I say especially on the women's side. But women tend to get injured more than men tend to get injured as far as ACL tears. Women tend to have
Yeah.
a higher rate of ACL tears in soccer, and so it's so important to have that deep roster if you want to be nationally competitive. And
And that
having
that that Q&A had Q&As about what happens if in the course of the season, an athlete's injured and is out for the season or even, done for their career. Can you replace them on the roster? And the answer is no. Once the
Yeah,
season
which is
starts,
wild. That's
the
what
roster is the
me and my
roster.
friends were sitting there trying to figure out. So what can I do? Maybe our club team, maybe we can use our club team then as a reserve team and then bring them on. But as soon as they said, no, you can't add it. So your roster is going to be frozen at a
Yeah.
certain point in the season. And then the names on that roster are the names on your team. And if you have 10 ACL tears and two players quit and three players are sick and you got to play with seven that week, you're
Yeah.
playing with seven. That's it. Tough luck.
Yeah, I sort of expect there will maybe be some adjustments here because I'm not sure it's going to work. And like you, I don't know who came up with these numbers. This is not in the book because I hadn't done the research or really thought of it at that time, but on my Business of College Sports website now, we did put up a post with the roster limits, but I had an intern help me do some research and find the average roster size for each sport this past season. Yeah, I think we did this past season. And so you could see the difference between, okay, this was the old scholarship limit, this is the new roster limit, and then here's what the average roster size was in each sport. So you could see the sports like swimming and diving that are having to have massive cuts because they carried these enormous rosters that were much larger than the new limit is. And that's why I was saying Grant House is getting so much hate because swimming and diving has been a sport very badly hit by this, track and field as well, because those were sports that had huge rosters that are now cutting down. And so he has done a couple of interviews now where he said he's getting hate, DMs and emails from swimming athletes who feel like he's ruined their college career because he, went after money and instead now they can't even play their sport.
Yeah, and it cracks me up because not to be cynical, the really, really good Division One kids are not complaining about this. It's
Yeah.
the mediocre athletes that maybe shouldn't even be on a D1 roster, but they used to be able to get a D1 roster spot, and it was good for social media and good for their ego. But if
Yeah.
you really want to compete, you should probably not be playing Division One. If you're that borderline where
You weren't getting
coaches are
playing time
wanting,
anyway.
do I want you or do I not want you or whatever, you're not going to play anyways. So
Mhm.
what is it that you really want that's important out of life, right?
Yeah.
And if playing time is part of it, then make a wiser choice rather than begging somebody to put you on a roster.
Yeah.
Wild. So what do okay, I just had a question, it just left my head. There's so much here, and maybe we'll have you on again on another day as we learn more, because This is fascinating, and this is affecting so many players and parents. Oh, I know the question. Okay, so if I'm the San Jose Earthquakes and I've got a youth player now, right, who's a stud, and I'm trying to encourage him to come to our academy versus go to Dallas or versus go to MetroStar or some other academy, right? DC United. Um, I can now say, I'll pay you $200,000 in NIL money, and we'll arrange an NIL deal for you here, and we can arrange that for you. So basically, we can start encouraging youth players to come to our youth teams if we can figure out a way to arrange NIL deals, and then they'll still have their college eligibility. Is that correct?
I think so. I'm trying to think of some of the because we've got state laws, and some of them specifically say that youth athletes can't participate in NIL. There's only a few of those. I'm trying to remember exactly which states. It's been a little while since I've had to know all the state laws because we've sort of gotten past that stage of NIL now. But there were a few that specifically said that athletes below the college level could not participate. Like Texas, they just had a new one that says that at a certain point now, right before you go to college, you can enter so that you can be working with colleges, but you couldn't do it like if you were a freshman or a sophomore. So each state law is a little bit different, but I would say in the
Okay.
majority of states,
Okay.
it wouldn't be a problem.
See, that's wild. Wait till this opens up because I've been told by some very high level players that are in high school that they've been having attorneys reach out to them, NIL attorneys, and
Yeah.
wanting to represent them in high school and wanting to get a hold of them, and and for obvious reasons. I mean, if you get the trust, if you're really good at your job, first of all, and the family trusts you and you really do a good job for them, then maybe your firm gets to represent that kid into their pro careers, right?
And that's
So
the goal. That's why they want to grab them young, is to build that relationship with the hopes they get to go into their pro career with them. And we've already seen them encouraging athletes in football and basketball. I know because those stories have made the news. There have been high school football and basketball athletes since 2021 who have been moving states to go to states where NIL is allowed at the high school level, or transferring to private institutions or academies that aren't governed by high school sports association rules in order to take part in NIL. Sort of the most famous one, which is I think you're far enough in the book, you've probably read this one now,
and
was
it's in California, and I'm
Cunningham.
very
Yep.
familiar with the California rules, having coached in high school for 9 years, that I can't get a kid to switch high schools just to play sports. There's got to be another reason.
This kid moved from Georgia to California to play football, and actually had to sit out about half of the year while he appealed this decision by the state high school association out there, because they weren't going to let him play because he didn't prove that there was some sort of hardship that caused him to move there. He moved there because agents told him they'd hook him up with money and move him out there, and he was living with a coach. That whole story is in the book. It was pretty well told in the news across multiple media outlets. And he ultimately did get to play the second half of the year, and eventually got recruited and isn't playing in high school anymore. Is at the college level now. But he's just one example of quite a few I knew at the football and in football and basketball in particular, who moved to another state because they lived in a state where high school NIL wasn't allowed, and somebody, a coach, an agent, a school, enticed them to come. And I think now it can happen pretty freely, with the exception, like I said, I think there's a few states that their state law was specific enough you wouldn't be able to do it in that state, but it's only 2 or 3 states. It's not widespread.
But yet, if a kid wants to, if you have a sports academy like IMG and they want to fully scholarship a kid, they can move them out here if they've always been able to do that. And I always thought, good, now their high school competes against public schools, and it's like it's so unfair, right? And out here in
This,
California, we had De La
yeah,
Salle, right? Their football program, very famous. There's been a movie written
yeah,
about it. And they were just paying, scholarship, and we're getting kids moving from all over the United States to
yeah,
come in and play football there, and that was perfectly okay through all these years, and competing against public schools who had a different
yeah.
set of rules.
Now they can lure them with the NIL deals. If they're competing against public schools and they're part of the state high school association, then you've got to follow those NIL rules. But like I said, 30 something of the states now have changed those rules and they allow it. Every state high school association looks a little bit different. Some of them have different parameters than others. But now in a majority, you could sort of lure somebody, I think, with an NIL deal that wouldn't be problematic in a lot of places.
All right, let's scare the heck out of parents for just 1 second, and only with the intent to get them to do their research and to do what's right for their and their family. What's your biggest nightmare story about an agent or an agency, and you don't have to name them unless they're in your book, that really just completely ripped off a family, ruined their lives? And yeah, what's your biggest nightmare story?
I mean, I can think of 3 right off the top of my head that the agent just took the money, that the athlete, that, the money filtered through the agent and down to the athlete, which isn't totally uncommon. I've had broadcast agents and literary agents. In both of those cases, money was paid directly to them. They took their cut out of it, then they paid it to me. That doesn't always have to be how the relationship looks, but that in itself is not problematic or out of the ordinary. However, because of that, it's pretty easy if an agent wanted to take your money and for you never to get it. And that's probably been the most egregious thing we've seen, and it's becoming more widespread. There is no barrier to entry to call yourself an NIL agent. The NCAA is going to have a voluntary registration, but they have no requirement. About half of the states don't even have state laws about it because they sort of expect the pro leagues to take care of that, and the pro leagues do. They all have, agent codes of conduct and tests you have to pass, and sometimes fees you have to pay, and you have to be a certified agent to represent players in that league. It's not like that at the college level. So anyone can walk out their front door right now and start calling themselves an NIL agent. And it's probably my biggest soapbox. And there's an entire chapter in the book about hiring an agent. And it has a list of questions you need to ask before you hire
Such a good
somebody,
chapter. Such
because
a good
there
chapter.
are people taking advantage. I'm going to the junior NBA is bringing me in to speak next month because they've seen at the NBA level guys showing up who have these agents who represented them in college, and that it's becoming a problem. And so they want to educate their athletes and the parents about how to hire an agent, because there are great ones out there, but there are also really bad ones. And if you don't know the right questions to ask, you might end up with one of those really bad ones who steals your money or ruins your reputation or who knows what else.
You did make a really good point in the book, and it was a great line. Uh, you were talking about the agent getting paid and then paying the player versus the player getting the money and then paying the agent. And your line was, "Yeah, remember who the employer and the employee is, right? You as a player are the employer. You just as easily could be getting the money and then paying your agent." And I suppose the agents are worried that they're not going to get their money. But Jiminy
Well,
Christmas,
exactly.
shouldn't the families be concerned that they're not going to get paid on the other side, right? I think that's a
Right.
fair
Well, and I
point.
think it's just that's why it's so important to ask questions, to talk to not only current clients of that agent, but try and find some former ones. Google the agent's name, find newspaper articles where it mentioned somebody else the agent represented who maybe they don't anymore, and find out why that person isn't with the agent anymore. That's where you get the good stories. And I've done that with hiring literary agents. In fact, the last time I was looking for a literary agent, the person I thought I was going to pick, I didn't, because I talked to both a current client and a former client, and they had the exact same complaint. They had never met each other, did not know each other, but they both had the exact same sort of bad situation with this agent, and that's why I didn't sign with her. And then, quite frankly, I still signed with the wrong person because of a question I didn't think to ask, and doesn't really apply here. It's kind of more on the publishing side of things. But I ended up parting ways with that agent, and I think I say this in the book, but I say it all the time out loud. It is worse to have a bad agent than it is to have no agent at all. You're better off with no agent than
That was
having
a
the wrong
great line
person.
too. That was really good advice, I thought.
I firmly believe it. I don't have a literary agent right now, and I got a couple of publishing deals while I haven't had one. I hired a literary attorney who looked over the contract. I am an attorney, and I still hired an attorney to look over the contract because I don't practice in this area. There might be things I missed, and there were. I had marked it up with my thoughts, and she found things I didn't. And so, you don't have to have an agent to do NIL deals or revenue sharing, but you do need an attorney who can look at the contract for you.
One of the things that I did is I put out on social media to everybody, what questions would they like me to ask you? And I don't normally do this, but there's an account on Twitter that I've been following. I just get a kick out of it. It used to be NIL versus NLI, but now it's NIL not NLI. And it's obviously somebody who worked in administration for a college, clearly knows
Yeah.
way too much. He or she knows way too much. He came up with a really good question, a couple of them. So the first one was, do you feel there should be specific restrictions on the types of products athletes can endorse, as in alcohol? And I thought, oh yeah, I mean, weed gummies. I mean, weed's legal in a lot of states now, and gambling. And it's like, is there a restriction on the types of products that they can endorse?
It depends on where they live, where they go to school. So some of the state NIL laws had specific categories that you couldn't do NIL deals, alcohol, tobacco, adult entertainment, pharmaceuticals. It varied from state to state, but those were some of the ones, gambling and sports betting. Those were the ones you saw over and over. Some states have no restrictions on it at all, but then some school policies have restrictions in them. I would say a lot of schools have removed those now. And so that we largely only have the state laws because schools realized if they're restricting you from being able to make money, they could get sued for an antitrust law violation. And they're not willing to, that's not the hill they're going to die on. So I would say most important to look at your state law and see what is and isn't allowed. Quite a few places there's no issue with alcohol, and we've seen athletes over 21 who have done deals with alcohol brands, mostly beer. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of liquor, but I know I've seen beer. Colorado in the beginning, they didn't have in their state law anything against sports gambling or betting, and I wrote a story about a sports betting company that came in and they offered a deal to every female athlete in the state of Colorado, Division 1, 2, and 3. If you were an athlete and you wanted to do it, you could apply and do it because they were moving into Colorado and they wanted to make this big splash. So it does vary from state to state. With my attorney hat on, I would say if you're a school, I wouldn't put it in your policy to restrict anything because you're going to end up getting sued by somebody who has to turn down a deal. So unless you want to deal with that, if I were a school, I probably wouldn't put it in there.
So it won't be long before we see athletes representing any vice that we could think of that we may not want our school to be represented by, but we've got no choice,
Yeah.
or
No,
we're
they
going to get
can't
sued.
wear the school like logo or colors or whatever when they're, say they're doing an Instagram post for, I don't know, a
Right.
weed company. They now people will probably still know, well, hey, that's the quarterback for XYZ university, but they can't be like wearing the logo and promoting something like that. So the school policies sort of vary. And some of the revenue sharing contracts have some provisions in them, like morals clauses, so that if an athlete, not so much that they were working with these types of products like we've been talking about, but if they get a DUI, they get arrested for sexual assault,
Right.
those sorts of things. We are seeing the morals clauses show up in those revenue sharing contracts to try and govern some of that behavior and either reduce payments or cancel the contract altogether.
But Pornhub and OnlyFans is okay.
Depending on what state you're in, yeah.
Crazy. Okay. Boy, this is going to be fun over the next few years, tracking the craziness of this. His other question was, what are your predictions for the future? And you've got a chapter in your book that kind of goes into this, but what are your predictions for the future of the evolution of the NCAA NIL rules and college sports landscapes? Just say over the next 3 years, let's say. Where do you see
Cool.
this merging to?
I still think the roster limits are potentially problematic and that we could see lawsuits around those roster limits and the opportunities that are going to get taken from athletes. I still think it's possible we see antitrust suits over the cap itself. 100% I'm positive we're going to see Title IX lawsuits, no doubt in my mind. I don't know that the NCAA is going to change any of its rules. They've basically said that's a school problem. The NCAA didn't tell people how to divide the money. They just, that's at the school's discretion, and Title IX only applies to the schools, not to the NCAA. So it is individual institutions' problem. So I don't think we see the NCAA change the rules there. The big one that we were all talking about at this conference I was at last week, which was full of attorneys, media members, agents, and then, a high level athletic directors and senior athletic administrators, was the NIL clearinghouse, which we didn't talk about here at all. But going forward, all athletes in Division 1, whether your school does revenue sharing or not and opts into this or not, every Division 1 athlete has to submit deals worth $600 or more to this new clearinghouse, which is called NIL Go. You'll sometimes hear it referred to as the Deloitte clearinghouse or the NIL clearinghouse, but it's up and running and deals are already being submitted. If you're doing multiple deals with the same party, if they're over $600 in the aggregate, as soon as you reach that $600 aggregate, that has to be put through the clearinghouse. If it is an outside third party brand or individual company, you submit it and that's essentially it. However, if it is an associated entity, so a booster, a collective, it's going to go through a value analysis and they're going to decide if it's within a reasonable range of compensation. We all imagine that there are going to be some deals that are turned down for that what are you going to say an athlete's doing for a $10 million contract that you can prove is like worth the $10 million. So when those start getting rejected, I think all of us who are lawyers in the space expect that is going to create a lawsuit over that particular part of the process. And so we were all sort of making bets amongst ourselves at the conference last week about how long the clearinghouse is going to last. A lot of us believe that it is not long for this world because it is going to create a whole new set of problems. But we'll see how it goes. It's already started up. It started on the 11th, so we're a little over a weekend already, and I've heard they've already turned down some deals. So we'll see what happens.
So one of the other topics that has parents, when I talk high school parents, look, high school parents are really upset right now, and I can understand because 10 years ago, their kids could have gotten into some of these Division I schools, and it wouldn't have been an issue. They would have been on rosters. They'd have been making teams. And one of the other things besides the roster caps that's plugged things up, and the transfer portal, which has kind of thrown things into a tizzy, although I still argue that that's just athletes trading spots. It's not really plugging it up as much. But the other one is the extra years. Of course, we had the COVID years, right? Where athletes were getting an extra year because of COVID. Now athletes are winning lawsuits and getting extra years because they played in junior college, and the rulings, the temporary rulings, I guess we could call them. There was a ruling that came out just recently that said for the year 2025 only, if you would have used your last year of eligibility because one of your years was a junior college year, we're going to get it back to you. But when the lawsuit, I can't remember the young man's name out here in California, was it Grant? When the lawsuit came out that he was going to get an extra year, the internet blew up. Oh, everybody's going to get an extra year. No, it just applied to him, folks. Calm down.
Yeah.
Doesn't apply to everybody. And there are coaches out there and people and club people telling people, go to junior college. You can get 2 years of eligibility and then just go to the NCAA. You'll get 4 more. And they're giving,
No,
families are taking this advice based on that. So first of all, that's not true, right? That
that's not
not
true.
true at all.
No.
Okay. But I could see a time, tell me what you think about this, where the NCAA gets tired of defending lawsuits and losing lawsuits. They
Yeah, I
can't just
mean,
can't go on. So far, the players have not lost a single lawsuit that I'm aware of. So
it's a huge budget issue for them. An enormous portion of their budget goes to legal fees, and they don't have any grand ground to stand on in a lot of these other than just saying this is how we've always done things and this we need this to preserve amateurism, which is why they're constantly over at Congress trying to convince them to pass some sort of bill to protect them, to
right,
exempt them from antitrust law. I don't envy
right,
them. You couldn't offer me enough money to go be an attorney at the NCAA. There's no dollar amount you could put on a check that would convince me to go do that job because it's thankless. And I think it's so difficult. They're in a position where they're trying to defend a business model that's constantly under attack, but like what's the alternative? What do you do? It's not just one thing you have to blow up, it's everything. And you got to have some rules in place. And how do you have rules without people suing you over the rules? Like they're kind of in a no-win situation. But the eligibility thing's interesting. I don't write a lot about it because I get so busy with the NIL and revenue sharing stuff that I just kind of read headlines, and I probably know, as much as anybody else who has just like read some of the news articles out there because I haven't covered it personally. But I do know that it does not mean that junior college athletes are all getting that eligibility back. It is a case by case basis, just the athletes who have won their cases. We've even seen athletes start to bring cases around, well, I only played one game of that year and I lost that whole, I got injured after one game
right.
and I lost my entire year of eligibility because I wasn't able to redshirt. We're seeing all these, but what about me? Like this happened to me, and like it's not fair because I lost a year over this. Like, and so right now it's like a case by case basis. I don't really
Right.
know where that's going to end up in the end. That's sort of, I think, the next big thing the NCAA has to turn their attention to now that the House settlement is sort of over. Like I said, there's an appeal already on that, so it's not over. But it's not taking their full bandwidth anymore.
And that appeal was from the women's side saying that their percentage that they were going to be allotted isn't enough. They're
Of the
looking for
back
more
pay.
money, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think this is the end of it. I do think this is the next big one. And I honestly can see the NCAA throwing their hands up in the air and saying, if you played NAIA, or if we're only concerned with the NCAA, that's all we're governing is the NCAA. You get 4 years in the NCAA. That's all you get. And that's what we're governing.
Yeah.
We can't control what the junior colleges do. We can't
Right.
control what
Mhm.
NAIA does. We can't control what USCAA does. That's not our business. When you come here, you get 4 years. And athletes could be playing for 4 years NAIA and theoretically, and then 4 years NCAA. And I could see
We're
that happening. I
we're gonna
mean,
end up with a bunch of 30-year-olds playing college sports.
we've already got it in soccer.
Yeah, that's true.
It's crazy, and people go to me all the time because we represent players from overseas, but we don't represent any of those types of players. So I don't know what the answer is. We've asked the NCAA, how does this 29-year-old come in and play? And their answer is, everything is done on a case-by-case basis. That's the answer we've got from them every single time, and they won't tell us about a specific case. I mean, you can go into the Army for 4 years, and then you're 24, and then, you know, you can have your gap year, and then you're 25. But other than coming in as a 25-year-old freshman, as if you were in the service, or you could be in the service for 6 years. Well, I guess you
Yeah.
could be a 26-year-old freshman or 27 if that's the case, but that's not what these kids are doing. And how
Right. Mhm.
these kids, and the other thing people can do is you can come in as a 24-year-old freshman, but you only have 1 year of eligibility. That's possible.
Right.
And
Mhm.
people don't take that into account. They just see a 26-year-old freshman and go, how is
I
that
think they've been
possible?
playing for
Well,
8 years. Yeah.
yeah, they don't get, they're going to get to play for 1 year, and then that's all they're going to get. But I could, man, I could see that happening. The other thing that tell me, give me your take on this one. It's funny that it seems to me like the NCAA has made all these changes and all this capitulation around two sports, men's basketball and men's football, because that's where all the revenue is. What happens when those sports end up doing what they were threatening to do and have been threatening to do, and just pull away to their own semi-pro league that's sponsored by the NFL and by the NBA, and it's a minor league now for those, and all that revenue goes away from the NCAA. Do you see that as a possibility?
I mean, I've heard discussion even at this convention I was at last week. People were talking about this, not as something that's going to imminently happen, but the idea that they were talking specifically about football, that football teams could be pulled out of the university, be privately owned. This was sort of like an alternative to private equity coming into college sports. You pull them out, you let them be privately owned, but they still have to pay the university to use the logo. So it's still the Florida Gators, but they aren't part of the university. They're privately owned. The athletes don't even have to be students. It doesn't matter if they're a student anymore. And that they would pay to license like the logos, they would pay to play in the stadium on Saturdays. So the university would still be getting some money, not as much, because then you're going to see the broadcast contracts go out to these private entities, not to the university. So they can get like some from this licensing and sort of, physical facility usage. And then because you now don't have football, which is your biggest male sport, what happens to female sports? Because you have to start balancing your Title IX differently if you're pulling them out. And the whole series of dominoes start to fall. And I don't think that's what the average fan wants. It's not what I want. I don't want to see college football pulled out of universities and not being a part of sort of that fabric and, like just licensing the logo, but these aren't even students. I don't know what the answer is. That we're all talking about that last week. People know that that's sort of something that's been bandied about. I don't think seriously at this point, or that it's imminent anytime soon. But 10 years ago, I would have said revenue sharing was never going to happen. So who knows where
Right.
we'll be at 10 years from now?
Well, the private equity thing was the one that really made me sold on the fact that I think in the next 5 years, my prediction is that that's exactly what's going to happen. So, explain what we're talking about when we're talking about private equity coming in, and because this is the craziest thing I had. This blew my mind more than all this other stuff when I see these private equity firms coming in and investing in college sports. How is that working?
Yeah, it could look a few different ways. I sat in on a session at the convention last week about what it could look like and how they could come into athletic departments. Most people I know in college athletics, and even the people I know on sort of the finance side, the CPAs that serve the industry, are really against it because at the end of the day, a private investor like that is going to prioritize returns. And college
Of
athletics
course.
are they're nonprofit entities. They're not supposed to, turn a profit. The emphasis is not on how can we do things more efficiently and make the most money, or they wouldn't have, they wouldn't be carrying a dozen or more sports that don't make any money for them, that actually lose money. So to me, private equity doesn't make sense in college athletics because college athletics is not a for-profit business. Even though we're talking about a lot of money in the system, it's not a for-profit business. And if you let a private equity, investor into your athletic department, and let's say you have above and beyond what you're required to have by the NCAA in terms of the number of sports you carry. So you've got, 20, 22 sports. Is a private equity firm going to let you keep those excess sports that you don't have to have by NCAA rules? Because they're losing money. They're eating into your bottom line. So I think I'm really against it. I think private equity coming into college athletics would fundamentally change what it looks like in all negative ways. I see no positives to it.
I'm with you, and I feel that way about a lot of this. I am looking honestly, I am looking for one of the other rule changes I'm hoping, and a lot of us have talked about it, is that let Division One football do what Division One football does. That's fine. Let Division One basketball do what it does, but why are we dragging the bowling team from Stanford to go play in the ACC and have to go to Duke. What are we doing to these kids? We're dragging them out of school. They're never going to make money in their, I don't know, whatever their sport is, right? I mean, the vast majority of athletes don't make a living at their sport when they're done with college, even at the Stanfords, even at the Dukes, even at but we're dragging these kids across the country, and all because of football and basketball, men's
Yeah.
basketball primarily.
And that's what opponents, sort of the NCAA's idea about amateurism and that they're students first and athletes second. That's the first thing they bring up is if you cared most about them being a student, you wouldn't have conference realignment look like it does and have athletes having to travel across the country constantly like that. If what you cared about was first and foremost their education. And it's hard to argue with that.
Yeah, have there been in these conferences that you go to, is there any talk about maybe reducing the number of, because right now you have to have a certain number of sports to be an NCAA school, and all of
Yeah.
your teams, there's only a few exceptions. Colorado College has women's soccer Division One and women's hockey Division One, but everybody else is Division Three.
Right.
But there's very few exceptions like that. For the
Yeah.
most part, it's either everybody's Division One or nobody's Division One. Has there been any talk about relief for the non-revenue Olympic type sports?
I have not heard that. I mean, it doesn't mean those conversations are not happening. They're not conversations I've been part of. At the FBS level, you have to have 16 sports, and no one who works in college athletics, but I think like some fellow media members sort of talked about once we move to revenue sharing, would there be pressure on the NCAA to lower that number from 16 so that you didn't have to carry so many so that you could better afford revenue sharing? I have not heard of any movement towards that though, or any major changes in term like you were talking about where maybe you have some sports that are division one and others that are at a lower division. I think it's more a matter of the division one schools that will decide they're not going to participate in revenue sharing and the divide that's going to create in division one. And when you think about when they're passing rules and making decisions, the autonomous conferences, the power four, they in on some topics they have more power and are able to vote separately on certain things, but there are a lot of things that are up for division one as a whole. And some of these division one schools have nothing in common. They're not the same
Right.
size, they don't value the same things, they don't look at athletics and their philosophy towards it the same way. Like it is super interesting when you think about decisions being made at the D1 level and being voted on by presidents who quite frankly are not always that educated about the athletic side. It's not the
Oh,
athletic directors
100%.
voting on these things, it's the presidents of the universities voting on these things. And I can't tell you the number of university presidents I've been brought in to meet with to educate them about college athletics. So Division One and the way it's governed by the NCAA is interesting, but we have seen that over the past decade. I've been reporting in this space since 2009 or 10. We have seen some major adjustments in how Division One is governed, and even now with this move into revenue sharing, we're seeing a new shift. Now we're going to have the College Sports Commission, which is separate from the NCAA and is going to specifically govern around revenue sharing and NIL. So I do think we'll continue to see some governance shifts. I'm just not sure exactly what they're going to look like.
Yeah, I know my son's Division One school, St. Francis in Loretto, Pennsylvania, is now shifting to Division Three, and we are seeing a lot of Division One schools that have been cutting their sports, trying
Mhm.
to shift money into other areas. So obviously, a
Right.
lot more changes coming up. I do want to bring you back. How do people find you? What's the best way for people to follow you? I highly recommend to anybody listening to this that you follow what Kristi does, and she just posts some great information. What's the best way for
Yeah.
people to get a hold of you and find you?
I spend probably too much time on social media, so you can find me on all the social medias. I'm on X, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I think the only one I don't do is Snapchat, out of the major ones, but I'm same username on all of them. It's Sports Biz Miss, Bizmiss at the end. And I'm pretty regularly putting up articles I'm writing or videos I'm shooting, either me giving advice or I just had one go up yesterday with an immigration attorney talking about international student athletes. So I constantly put content out there. And then now the book is out. It came out early. It wasn't supposed to come out till July, but because of the House settlement, it is out and already at retailers nationwide now. The Athletes NIL Playbook, and it does cover revenue sharing as well.
Great
And
book.
that's
Pick
it.
it up. Real quickly before I let you go, I didn't even think about that. International athletes. What can
International.
you tell us
Yeah, we could do a
about
whole hour just on
international
that.
athletes? Like, just give us a synopsis. So first of all, they can't work in the United States under a student visa, right? Under a
And
straight
work, I'm
F
putting it in quotes because
F1
it's not
visa.
Yeah, not work like we think about, like a W-2 kind of job. Work under a
Right.
student visa has a really different definition and essentially doesn't allow them to perform any sort of service or sell any sort of product that they may have made, because it would constitute work. And so, if people want to get into like the nitty gritty of it, my podcast, the Business of College Sports podcast, an episode just came out yesterday with an immigration attorney. We went through all these like what if scenarios around NIL and revenue sharing. But here's the high level stuff I would say you need to know on an F1 student visa. For NIL, you can't receive NIL for anything that you are actively doing while you're on US soil. So you can't put up an Instagram post with a brand while you're here in the US. You can't sign an autograph. You can't promote merchandise or make a personal appearance. You cannot be on US soil and actively do anything to receive NIL money. However, there are ways to do NIL deals when you are out of the country. So you go home for Christmas or for summer break and you want to do brand deals while you're home, that's fine. If you want to do, for example, Oscar Jibwe, who played at Kentucky, they had a tournament in the Bahamas, and his agent put together all these NIL deals that he did while he was in the Bahamas. And so immigration attorneys always say you got to comply with the visa of whatever country you're in. So he had to comply with the Bahamian tourism visa that he was there on. But if you're off US soil, there are safe ways to do it. There are also passive income opportunities. So if you sign a group licensing deal, your whole team is getting jerseys sold with your names on it, or you're doing a trading card package with the whole team and it's done through group licensing. You can participate in it and earn from it, but you can't publicize it while you're in the US. So if there's a jersey with your name on it and they're selling it in the school store, you can receive money through the group licensing deal for it, but you can't be going on social media and telling people my jersey's for sale in the team store, go get it. That gets into that work territory and makes it active instead of passive. It's more complicated than that. So if people are going to dabble in this, please go listen to the full podcast I have with Ksenia Mayarova because we get into like the little nuances of it. Revenue sharing, she specifically said, and this is the clip from the podcast I put all over social media yesterday that's less than a minute long. I said to her, have you seen a revenue sharing deal yet that an F1 student visa holder could do? And she said, no. The way they are structured, every single one of them would be problematic. And so the option is if you are very talented in your sport, if you are at the very top of your sport, you could apply for a P1 visa, which is generally for professional athletes. But we have seen college athletes getting P1 visas, particularly in certain sports, like for football, it's tough. But track and field, there have been quite a few. I think she told me she's even gotten a fencing one now. We've seen golf. I'm not sure if there have been any soccer P1s yet, but a P1 would be able to participate in NIL and revenue sharing just like student athletes who are American citizens. So there's so much more to it. There's a chapter, well, part of a chapter in the book
There
about
is.
international
Yes.
student athletes. And Ksenia, who I had on my podcast, is one of the two attorneys, and I had two attorneys and an agent I talked to for that part of the book. She's one of them. But we just did an updated podcast yesterday because we hadn't talked about revenue sharing yet, and we didn't talk about revenue sharing with respect to international athletes in the book. So I made her do a whole new podcast with me so we could touch on revenue sharing as well.
I think that's great. And that can be your podcast can be found on all major
Yeah.
platforms.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, again, thank you so much. And everybody, please pick up a copy of her book. You can get it, I'm assuming, at Amazon or
Barnes and
right?
Noble, Books a Million. Yep. Pretty much everywhere.
Okay, brilliant. And parents, you won't be sorry if you're thinking about this for your kid, or if you're a player and you're in college and you're thinking about this, you want to do it. It's probably the best resource out there on the market right now for players and for parents. Thank you again for making time. I know we tried to do this about a month ago and things got crazy, but I hope you're willing to come back on again
Absolutely.
if things change.
Yes, there's always so much to talk about with this. So I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right, everybody. I want to also tell you about a new product that we have out for players that maybe aren't ready to go into college yet, and it's called gapyearsoccer.com. So we have been traveling the world. We've gone to Germany, we've been into Spain and England looking for reputable academies that could train players for a gap year that could give them time to develop. My own son did this for 2 years out of high school. He was supposed to go to Sonoma State University. They had just won the national championship. It was a great opportunity for him. But a friend of mine said, would he like to go to England for a couple of weeks? So we sent him, and he calls home at the end of a couple of weeks and said, they want me to stay for 2 years. So he did. He ended up staying there for 2 years, and out of that, he ended up in between getting a little trial in Germany in the Bundesliga, and then didn't make it, and then back over to England. But the maturity that we saw in our son when he spent time overseas was tremendous. He grew physically. He grew, like I said, in socially. He grew. He just grew up as a young man, and so he went into college as a 20-year-old freshman, and it made a big difference in his college career. So if you've got a player that you think needs more time to develop and could benefit from a gap year overseas, we've got three really good opportunities for them. Like I said, Germany, Spain, even a couple of opportunities that we've been looking to in Spain, and then in England. We've got an incredible opportunity. So go to gapyearsoccer.com and look at what we've got. You can apply. One of our staff will get you on the phone and explain to you all the opportunities and how the costs work and how the year works, how the breakdown works, and what the rules are, the NCAA rules for a gap year, and giving your kids a little bit more time to mature and get ready for college. It's been a great success for quite a few of our clients, as well as, like I said, for my own son. So go to gapyearsoccer.com.